I was hurrying during class today, so you may have skipped the first two and came to the last two, but this is the final one. These are the philosophical challenges to the French Catholic Church. I'm going to focus on Voltaire, Diderot, Holbach, and Condorcet. Now, if you're reading well, you know there's a ton more, but let's talk about these four. Now, how do the philosophers view the church? The philosophers believed it was arbitrary. It was based on the so-called Bible, not my view, the philosophers' view. They believed that the first estate or the clergy held too much authority socially, and they also believed that the king manipulated it. Remember, the Edict de Fontainebleau outlawed other religions, only allowing for Catholicism, and they were kind of triggered. The philosophers began to realize, is the king using the church to lie to us? And the philosophers did believe that the French Catholic Church was the obstacle to intellectual progress. Not as surprising, throwing Galileo here. We know that the philosophers believed the church itself was holding on to its power. Now, if you think about Spinoza, I think they probably grooved Spinoza a little bit here, because remember, he argued that the institutional churches, by the time they provided order, were now about their power. And with that, they're going to impede any real intellectual progress. I think we've done a really good job at pointing that out. So now let's talk about the specific details. Voltaire challenged the church. He couldn't stand the monopoly the French Catholic Church held in France. He wrote his philosophical letters in the English. I do want to point out he overly romanticized the toleration in England because, remember, England did not tolerate Catholicism. Catholicism was still outlawed. It's kind of interesting here because Voltaire naturally is opposed to the Catholic Church, and England was against the Catholic Church. So therefore, I do see that he thinks it's okay to alienate. In the name of toleration, you can alienate Catholicism. I'll let you ponder that one. And I love the quote I pulled from the reading here. It says, if one religion were only allowed in England, the government would very possibly become arbitrary, a tyranny. If there were two, the people would cut another's throats. Think about it. He's thinking about the French wars of religion. But there are such a multitude, they live happy and in peace. So he's seeing Quakers, a Muslim maybe, a Jew maybe, a Puritan, and he begins to say, see, because this toleration occurs, England is able to progress. So he believes ultimately the French Catholic Church is the number one obstacle to development. He then later writes the Treatise on Toleration. I do think most of you in first block at least need to go back to the reading because the Treatise on Toleration is a really important aspect because he attacks fanaticism. Fanaticism is a rabid belief system of dogma. A fanatic is overly dogmatic. And he talked about the Calais affair. The Calais affair was a very unfortunate moment in history. There was this kid who was very sad. He ended up being found hanged on a tree. And the community believed it was the Huguenot father who murdered his son because the son wanted to convert to Catholicism. The Catholic mob fanatically went and lynched him, and he was hanged on the same tree as his son was. It was only found out later that the father did not kill his son. The son had committed suicide. So Mr. Voltaire concluded that religious fanaticism hides truth. If we're fanatical, we are no longer able to be objective. So therefore, fanaticism, what I call dogmatism, right? Being overly dogmatic is the sin of Catholicism. And eventually he did just say, we need to crush the infamous thing. By looking at England, by looking at France, he concluded that the French Catholic Church was the most important obstacle for the progress for France. So therefore, he ultimately just wanted to crush the infamous thing. And with that said, I do want to point out he was a chief proponent of deism. I'm not sure if he invented deism or if it was just something he believed in, but deism, it's the most rational religion. I actually have a friend of mine who identifies as a neo-deist. But deism is the belief that God is the creator of the universe. He created the natural laws to hold it together, and then he bailed out. He no longer was intimate with it. In some ways, we talk about how deists sees the world as a clock and God as the clockmaker. Does the clockmaker have to intervene when the clock's working? Of course not. It operates on its mechanicalness. Now, there's other views, and we see here, Diderot, not Diderot. You can call him Diderot if you want to spell him correctly. Totally get it, but he's Diderot. And his encyclopedia, his favorite thing was to bash Christianity. He identified it as the most absurd and the most atrocious in its dogma. Holbach and the System of Nature. I do hope this is the most challenging part of the read. Holbach was really interesting. Believe it or not, believe it, totally up to you. But when we look at it, he introduced this thing called materialism. Materialism is not the possessions. I will tell you, I will have that definition up there. Some of you will not pay attention. You guys will get it wrong. Totally cool. But this materialism is the belief that there's nothing outside of matter. There are no thoughts. There's no soul, there's no spirit, there's no God. The whole universe, macro is a machine, and humans on the micro is a machine. And we are nothing more than the universe. And because of that, he is the first modern atheist. In some ways, you can even call him an anti-theist. He believed that Christianity in itself was evil. Not just that it was corrupt, that it in itself is evil. Look what the quote I pulled out. He believed that Christians were zealous servants of a barbarous God who think themselves obliged to even offer themselves as a sacrifice to him. He just thought they were ridiculous, they were absurd, and ultimately they in themselves were evil. They've been blinded by dogma, and they're no longer able to recognize truth. That's Holbach and the System of Nature. And within the same paragraph or two, we see a guy named Condorcet. Condorcet wrote his book called Progress of the Human Mind. And here he viewed the church as the number one arbitrary control obstacle to truth. He believed once you strip off the church, once people are able to use pure reason, getting away from the church, that people will be able to enter the 10th stage of progress, which is perfection. He believed only through reason there would be perfection. So therefore, all the old orders, the estate system, absolutism, mercantilism, but most importantly, the French Catholic Church, when you get rid of those, when you strip those off the people, we are now free to enter in perfection. And that's what we see, guys, right? So ultimately, this is the conclusion. We're going to see the idea that by the late 18th century, intellectual world of France became diametrically opposed to the French traditions. They opposed the divine right theory of the monarch, absolutism. They defined mercantilism. They hated the estate system, and they believed that the French Catholic Church alone was the one that held them together. So therefore, they needed to destroy these four. The only way was to pure destruction. But I want to challenge this, guys, to you. Think about when you destroy everything that holds something together. It doesn't have any integrity. And in the end, we're going to find there's going to be a lot of chaos. But I hope that makes sense to you guys. I hope that these looms have been good.